Welcome to The Cynical Developer, the podcast that helps you to improve your development knowledge and career through explaining the latest and greatest in development technology and providing you with what you need to succeed as a developer. We've recently launched our Patreon page, which can be found at cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon. If you aren't familiar with Patreon, it's an easy way for those who are interested in this show to help out by simply pledging a small amount each month in sponsorship. Now that could be as little as $5 a month, which is about £3.80, or as much as you like. You will enable us to dedicate more time creating more content to help you, including videos, more blog posts, and even more shows. So if you can, head over to cynicaldeveloper.com/Patreon and get involved. In this episode, we talked to Kevin Lamping about WebdriverIO. Kevin is a front-end engineer living in San Antonio, Texas. He helps organise Hill Country JS, a front-end meetup, and contributes to various open source libraries. In his free time, when he's not playing with his kids, Kevin dabbles in tabletop gaming, the piano, and gardening. So welcome to The Cynical Developer, Kevin.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Not a problem. Thank you for sparing the time to come and talk to us today.
Mm-hmm.
That's a bit of a different mix of pastimes we don't very often see from developers. Is the tabletop gaming. That's pretty standard for a lot of devs. Not something I get into. I've played a bit of keyboard in the past. So piano, music and programming. I guess gardening. That's something very different for a developer.
I get that from my older brothers.
Yeah.
When I was growing up, they were trying some stuff out with gardening, and I've always found it to be just the perfect escape from staring at screens all day. It's outside, it's with your hands, you're working in dirt and stuff, you're feeling an actual breeze going around. Sometimes it's a bit hot, but it's still kind of that same idea of you literally debugging things when you pick bugs off. A terrible joke, but it's such a perfect medicine after a day of staring at a screen.
Yeah, just to get out of the sweaty office.
Yeah, go sweat outside, and if it's not too cold or too hot, some days are nice, especially when it's gardening. It's usually not too cold.
I don't mind doing a little bit of gardening. My garden is on a hill. It goes up in like stages, and it doesn't look that big. But when you start getting out there and trying to weed it and plant flowers and stuff, it's a lot of work. And I've had 3 gardeners come and say, we'll do it, and we'll do it for however much they were going to charge. And each of them came once, and then made an excuse and didn't come back. I think it was far too much work for them. Yeah.
The thing with gardening is you start really small, and the problems grow exponentially. So, you have these little tiny seeds, and you're like, well, I should plant like 20 of these, 30 of these, and really get a good garden, maybe 100. And then a month down the road, you've got just these huge plants that you don't know what to do with, and dealing with weeds, and why does this one have this weird color to it, and what type of bug is this? So many pictures I've taken of bugs, just trying to figure out what they are. Whether they're good or bad.
It is interesting. I've got a big tub of glyphosate there to go and spray all the paths with, but I'm waiting for a couple of days of sun to be able to get out there and do it. And being in the UK, it's very few and far between, so it could be a year or two before I get out there to do that.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're not here to talk about plants and insects and bugs and weeds. We're here to talk about WebdriverIO. So, what is WebdriverIO?
To try and succinctly put it, it's an open source Selenium test automation tool, which may not make a lot of sense, but it's basically a way to automate testing of websites. So if you have a website that, take for example, a login form, and you want to make sure that the user can log into the website, WebdriverIO will help with that by providing a way for you to write the actual functionality. So saying, I want to go to this login, or I want to go to this URL, I want to go to this login field, this form field, and you can use a CSS selector to access, to say, this specific form field.
Right.
And then say, I want to input this text into there, and then I'm going to do the same thing for the password, and then I'm going to trigger a mouse click on the submit button, or maybe trigger an enter key being pressed. So basically what the user will be doing on your website, you can kind of fake that out using WebdriverIO. And so it allows you to do that, but there's lots of tools that allow you to do that. What's really special about it to me is how many integrations it comes with, and how feature rich it is. And so some examples are, there are these, well, if you do any unit testing, you might be familiar with Mocha.js.
Yep.
And that's great for unit testing. It's actually integrated into WebdriverIO. You can use that. You can use Jasmine if you're familiar with Jasmine. So it's got features there. There's lots of third-party tools that we'll probably talk about in a little bit that have really, really simple integrations. All you do is install an NPM package, and then you add it to your services list, and it's integrated, and it comes with a bunch of features there. So that's that's what it really helps stand out about it.
Okay. So you talked about NPM there. So it's something to do with Node.js.
Yes.
Can you go into that a little bit for those listeners who don't know what Node.js is?
Right. It's basically Java or JavaScript on the server. Oh man, I don't want to confuse Java and JavaScript. It's JavaScript on the server. So it's really helpful for front-end devs who are very familiar with JavaScript and using JavaScript in the browser, but maybe less familiar with traditional server-side languages like PHP or Python or Java. And so maybe they want to add some functionality that's more server-specific, but don't want to have to learn an entirely new programming language just to get that set up. That's where Node.js can really come in, and it's a environment you're somewhat familiar with. It does come with NPM. NPM is a fantastic package manager that makes it really easy to install various packages from around the web to help, WebdriverIO being one of them, to help add functionality and stuff to make things easier for you to work with.
Yeah, so NPM is a nice solution rather than what you would have had a few years ago, which is like a third-party folder full of hundreds and hundreds of libraries that you would reference in your project. You reference an NPM config or file, and that pulls it all in. And for those that are in the .NET world, it's very much like NuGet, but for JavaScript.
Yeah, and I think Python picked something up. Ruby has their gems. It's becoming pretty popular practice to have that sort of thing.
Yeah, it makes it a lot simpler to download source code and open the project up and run it, because it goes and gets everything. Whereas a few years ago, you'd go and download some open source project and then spend the next 7 hours trying to find all the different versions of all the different libraries that it was using, just to try and get the thing to run. I remember having that sort of fun off the likes of Code Project and places like that. Yeah,
and then having to figure out where the paths are for everything.
Yeah.
So in this example code, it says that the path is here, but you downloaded it somewhere else. And then if you ever try to update all of those third-party modules, it can be a real pain, because you have to re-download everything and unzip it all or uncompress it all and move it around.
Yeah, it's a bit of a faff. But so you also mentioned that WebdriverIO is automated UI testing. So basically, you're scripting a user to go in and do what a real user would do. Okay.
Yeah, that's the basics of it. Is you're making a computer test a website for you. So you're teaching a computer how to use your website, and you create these paths. I want to test that when I go to this page, I expect to see this content, and I expect when I click this button for this error message to appear, or if I have some sort of rich interface that, like an accordion menu, when I click another item on the accordion menu, it closes one. You can do what's called an assertion, and that's where you assert that a value, it matches another value. So you have your expected value, and then you have your actual value, and you assert that those are the same. So really good ways of just basically doing automating what you normally would do manually.
Sure. So you can you're basically scripting up your user stories or your user journeys, depending on what sort of terminology you use. Whereas with our normal unit testing, that's all in code and it's running code. It's not actually doing anything with the UI. But with this, you can actually say, as a user, I want to be able to click this button and it opens this accordion as the example and shows me this data, and you can actually script that, and you're testing that user story for the UI.
Right. Yep. That's the big difference. Is unit testing is great for testing a specific bit of code. This is more like integration testing, or another term is functional testing, end-to-end testing, user acceptance testing. Although I don't know about user acceptance testing, because that might be more just like the user interaction, making sure that the button's the right color and things like that. Or like it's findable, things like that. But
okay. So one of the other technologies that you mentioned there was Selenium as well. What's Selenium?
Selenium is a very large tool that's been out in the industry for a while. They just came out. They're coming out with a new version. They're starting to standardize it through the W3C. They're trying to standardize it through there. And basically, it's an open source tool used to control programs or to control browsers programmatically. So that comes back with the ability to fake a mouse click, or to enter text into an input field, or to get text or get information from the browser. So yeah, it's basically just I want the browser to do X, Y, and Z, and Selenium helps do that.
Right. So if Selenium already does that, what's the need for WebdriverIO? How does that help you as a front end dev?
So Selenium is kind of language agnostic. There are certain like tools that are official Selenium tools for things like Java and Python. There is one that's for JavaScript, but with WebdriverIO, it really builds on the basics, the fundamentals that Selenium provides, and adds in a wealth of features. So what's really neat about WebdriverIO is that it's just it just kind of sits on top of Selenium and talks back and forth to Selenium. So you can literally go in and in your JavaScript code make those same calls that WebdriverIO is making for you. So you can interface directly with Selenium, and there's a lot of power in there because you don't have to wait for you don't have to work through this weird kind of language between the two. You just once you kind of understand it, it makes a lot more sense to yourself that WebdriverIO is sending information to Selenium, and Selenium is sending that information back to WebdriverIO, and it's telling you what to do. But if you wanted to go around all that, you could. So yeah, WebdriverIO is really just a way of getting started faster and getting a lot more features so that you don't have to build all that boilerplate around Selenium. So yeah, technically you could work without WebdriverIO. You could just use a straight JavaScript interface. But WebdriverIO makes things so much simpler.
Right. I guess it's like getting on an aeroplane, isn't it? You could fly from A to B and be the pilot, where all you're doing is flying the plane and tweaking a few little things. Or you could be a passenger. You still get from A to B, but you get everything else with it as well. You get all the nice things, all the food, all the entertainment, and it's a better experience than actually just flying the plane.
Right, and I think it's really important because as developers, we're not really paid to write tests. We're paid to have software that works.
Yeah.
And so you don't want to spend a ton of time trying to set up your test automation. You want to be able to go in and not have to spend too much time learning it, or trying to add all these different features and all these different integrations. So it's like trying to figure out how to get Mocha hooked up. WebdriverIO makes that super simple. You just say you want to use Mocha, and it sets everything up for you. adds all that in. It downloads the npm packages for you, and you're ready to start writing in Mocha.
Sure. So what is Mocha as well?
Yeah, Mocha is I call it like a test framework. So it's a way of adding structure to your tests, and also adding the ability to report different results from your tests. So with Mocha, you can say, I want to report when a test fails. I want this information from it. Or if you're running Mocha from another tool and you want that tool to do something, if everything passes or everything fails, you can send these status codes back and forth between the two. So the big things about Mocha are it's got these things called describe blocks and it blocks. That's it blocks. And so you put all your tests inside of those blocks, and it really helps organize all your tests. So you can say, I'm going to describe my login page, and it should have a email input. And then in there, you write your test. And so if that test fails, Mocha is going to say, hey, the login page, it should have a email input failed. And so you know exactly where to look when things go wrong.
Right. Okay. So if you're using Mocha with this, is it possible to run and debug those tests manually, as well as sort of just, I guess you would just run a JavaScript file of some sort or a page and it would go and run those tests? How does that work?
So that's one of the really nice features about WebdriverIO is it comes with this debug command. And so you can say, at this point, I want to debug my script. I know that something is going wrong. Because this is running in Selenium, it's kind of running in a browser that you don't necessarily have access to as it's running. It's kind of going through really fast. So if you need to pause and like look at the page, maybe you need to make sure that the right page is loading, or that when you clicked a button, is it that the button click didn't work, or is it that the text just isn't there, or something, like saying you're trying to find some text. You have this debug command, and I've got a 5-minute video on it that kind of goes into what it does. But basically, you say, I'm going to debug right here. It's going to pause the browser for you, so you can look at that browser if you have it running on your computer and see what the website's up to. You can open up your dev inspector tools and check out all the stuff. And then you can actually also use it as a REPL. So I can't remember what that acronym stands for, but yeah, you can basically run WebdriverIO commands in real time. Right. So say you have this one command, let's say the get HTML command, which will get the HTML source of an element. And you need to know what is going on in there. You can actually run that command while you're paused from your command line, and it'll report back right away. So that can be really helpful for testing out how calls work and what kind of stuff is coming in there. Yeah. And then you always have console.log is also always available for you. So you can, if you're not familiar with that, it's basically a way to log messages out. So you can log like variables out and see what the value is of them, and see where the program's running and everything. Right.
So it's a bit like using in Chrome, using debugger with the with the dev tools open, and then you can put your breakpoints in. You can actually do that with the with WebDriver and Selenium. That's cool. So because it's not running it in a browser that you can see, how does it deal with animations and stuff? So say I click on something, and it opens up a panel that slides out from the side. Does it know to wait for that, or does it just keep looking until it finds the control that should be on the page?
Yeah, you kind of have to program that in a little bit. Anytime that there's a request going on from the browser, so say you click a button or click a link and it takes you to an entirely new page.
Yep.
Selenium is smart enough to say, I'm not going to do anything until all the requests are done.
Right.
And then it'll keep running. So that's not actually WebdriverIO doing that. That's Selenium. But there are some features in WebdriverIO that are really helpful. There are these wait for commands or wait until commands. And you can pass in like wait until visible. and then pass in the selector of the element you want to wait is visible. You can wait for a element to have text. You can wait for an input field to have a certain value. And then there's just this generic wait until that you can have a function that you define what you want to wait until. So if you want to wait until a class name is gone on this element, you can say that. You can say, I'm going to wait until, and then say, if element.className is equal to the expected value, then return true, otherwise return false. And I'm going to wait 10 seconds for this to happen.
Right.
So I've used that pretty often on single page apps for waiting until the loading screen is gone. When you load the page, it has a loading screen. So you want to say wait until visible or wait for visible. And then there's actually it's a flag that will negate it. So it says, so it's basically wait until it's invisible or until it doesn't exist on the page anymore.
Right.
And then it'll start running your test. There's also a very basic pause command. So if you want to pause for 3 seconds, you can just do that.
Like a thread.sleep type thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. So with that picking up about elements transitioning and fading in and out and all the different things like that, is it completely what's the word I'm looking for? Does it matter what framework you're using to run those movements, those animations?
No,
it doesn't at all. It just supports everything.
Yeah, I mean, it's as if you're a user and you say, I'm not going to use anything that has jQuery UI on it. Like it'd be really hard to figure that out to begin with.
Right.
Yeah.
Because it's all manipulating the DOM, it doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah. And so you can use a new tool like React or Vue or Angular or go back to jQuery UI or things like that.
Yep.
As long as it's HTML that you're looking at on the page, you can figure that stuff out. There is a little bit of customization you're going to need to do depending on the class name and everything. Again, with animations, those are a little bit trickier, and I know some folks will just turn animations off when they're running their tests because they don't want to test that. You kind of have to scale down what you're expecting to test. Otherwise, you can really wrap yourself up and get kind of stuck in a bunch of stuff.
And then if you're a purist, that's really going to grind your gears there because you're testing a different route technically.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
So I'm here to ask the stupid and cynical questions. So the next one is, I would say, was probably pretty stupid, but we've just got to say it to get it out there that WebdriverIO is only for testing websites.
Pretty much. You can actually there's another integration with Appium, which is for testing mobile apps.
Right. Okay.
That you can use. You do have to do a little bit more configuration to get all that set up. I have been able to do that. There's it's less polished, I would say, than website testing, but you can use it for mobile app testing using Appium. So
okay,
but
that's
apart
cool.
from that, yeah.
That's not something I'm aware of. Appium. I guess that's a Selenium clone that works for mobile applications.
Yeah, I think it actually, maybe not. Just a second. Yeah, it uses WebDriver, which is different from WebdriverIO. There's to clarify on this, there's Selenium, then there's like Selenium WebDriver.
Yep.
And from what I remember and from what I've read, Selenium and WebDriver were kind of separate tools, and then they combined. And what WebDriver is, it's basically an API for using Selenium.
Right.
So if you have a Selenium, you're going to have a Selenium server running to run your tests. And there's actually some really nice features in WebdriverIO to help you get that running really easily. I used to worry about with getting a Selenium server running, like I have to learn all these Java commands and I have to get this weird Java environment set up. Yeah. But it's actually, there's a couple NPM modules that make that a lot easier. WebdriverIO has some services that make that a lot easier as well, so that it's as long as you have I think you do have to have Java on your system. you can get it set up pretty easily. But anyway, so Appium uses that same WebDriver protocol. So
Right.
it's very similar to Selenium. I don't know if, just trying to read here real quick how it's related to Selenium. I think it is it's not Selenium, but it's based on the same ideas of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're writing all these tests with WebDriver to test, for want of a better word, the UI and all the buttons and everything that experience all works for the user. Is it easy to maintain these tests, or is it really involved? Would I be looking into a lot of overhead, being able to add this into my development process?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and the answer is yes and no. It really depends on how many tests you write and how you write them, whether it's going to be a lot of overhead. You can have test debt in the same way that you have tech debt. So if you base all your tests on these pauses, so you say I'm going to expect the page to take 3 seconds for this thing to run, for like this request to be made, like this I need to get some data from an API and I'm expecting 3 seconds. Well, if the network is slow that day, then your test is going to fail.
Right.
Or any part of it, it's going to fail. So that could be an issue, and that's why those wait commands are really helpful. Is they focus less on the time that you're waiting and more on the actual results that are coming back to you. And then anytime HTML gets updated, you kind of run the risk of it breaking your test, because if the HTML changes, a class name changes, and you are using that class name as a selector, you're going to have to go in and update all your selectors as things change. I would recommend, if you are in the initial stages of building out a website, you actually don't use WebdriverIO. You just don't do functional testing at that point, because in that stage, the user interface is going to change so much. So the website itself is going to change. So you're going to spend a lot of time writing these tests, and then they're going to be useless because you had to completely rewrite how the website looks and feels and stuff like that. So it's really helpful for websites that have been out there for years at a time or something like that, and maybe you want to go in and update something and you don't really know what to test for. Having these tests in place would be really helpful, because say you bring somebody in who isn't very familiar with the website and you want them to change one thing. That's like the best case scenario for other things breaking on the website, because they don't know what to test. They don't know what other pages to test, how to get to those pages, things like that. So if you have a nice set of WebdriverIO tests, you can just run those right after the person makes their update, and make sure that everything is still working mostly the same.
Yeah, it's a similar discipline to when we're writing unit tests at the moment. In the current way, if you go in and change something, it's going to break those tests. And those tests make you aware of where else it's broken, because you don't always get the nice errors that we do in the likes of Java and C# and that at compile time, because there is no compile time for the Java stuff. Yeah. One tip I would actually throw out there, as far as when you're writing the test,
is to if you can, add IDs on your elements to reference, because IDs are less likely to change. And if you use them like test ID XYZ, there's even if that element moves or something like that, or we need to change the class name on it or some other thing, that ID is probably going to stay the same, and so it should still run the same.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So, what browsers are supported by WebDriver?
Yeah, this is another big selling point of Selenium, is that basically all of them, within a reasonable amount of time. Obviously, new browser versions that come out can be kind of difficult to have support for right away. But you've got things like Edge and Firefox up to the latest, and going way back to the earlier versions. Chrome is the same way. There's actually with Chrome, they're releasing Chromium, which is kind of like their headless Chrome browser.
Yep.
So if you're familiar with Phantom.js, it's very similar to that. Those are browsers that you don't use to browse the internet, you use for testing, or you use for some sort of automation. And so, yeah, there's Chromium, there's IE. I think you can go back to 6 or 7, because WebdriverIO isn't actually the thing that maintains that. It doesn't have to worry about that. All it has to do is provide an interface into Selenium, and then you tell WebdriverIO, these are the browsers I want to test on, and you can actually say I want to test on IE, Firefox, and Chrome. For Firefox and Chrome, I want to test on Mac and PC, and I want the Windows version to be X, and I want the Mac version to be this, and then I also want to test on a iPhone version, iOS, whatever, and then it will run those exact same tests that you have on all those different browsers. So
right.
It's
And
really
that's all
really,
in the Selenium server, is it?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
And that's where we get into third-party tools. So I would like to mention that, because getting that set up, you do have to have access to like an iPhone if you want to test on an iPhone, the actual physical device.
Right. Okay.
And then if you want to test on Windows and Mac, or Windows, Mac, and Linux or something, you do have to have those physical devices. So there are these third-party services that have popped up that basically provide those devices for you, and functionality around there. Sauce Labs is a very popular one. Browser Stack is another.
Yep.
Testing Bot is another. And those are built around, you can do manual testing in there. So you can go to their site and say, I want to open up this browser on this system. And you can actually manually control it and everything. Right. Or you can have WebdriverIO control it for you. Okay. So it's basically just a Selenium. It has a Selenium server running on their service. And you just tell WebdriverIO, okay, here's my username, here's my password, or my key, my access key for logging in, and I want to use this service. And it integrates really well with that. And with their more recent updates, they've added a lot of functionality in that regard, so that it'll send your test name over to the service, so that with those services, you can like replay video from everything and see how it goes. Okay. And so it'll actually label that video with the test name you have. Yeah, and then it'll send whether it was a successful test or a failing test. So you can see a nice green check mark or like a red X if something went wrong. Makes it really easy for you to find out kind of debugging. Like
it sounds really, really good for the likes of myself who, we're programmers, we write the code, we don't really like doing the testing side of it, the manual testing. But I could see a lot of QAs and test managers now thinking, great, I could replace my team now. Because we could just get the devs to write all the tests, and we don't need anybody sat there clicking it. We don't need click monkeys anymore.
Well, I would say maybe you don't need click monkeys, but you do need people testing the harder stuff. And I think that's what's really powerful about this, is you can use this to test the really easy stuff, the simple stuff.
Yep.
And then things like animations. Did that animation look right? That's actually a more difficult thing to test with WebdriverIO or Selenium, because you would have to take each measurement as the animation goes through and compare that to something, and that's going to be something tough to do. And then there's all these kind of crazy scenarios that maybe you don't want to spend time writing formal tests for, but you would like to kind of make sure are still something to watch out for. Yeah. So I still think that even with this automation, you're not going to replace manual testing.
Right.
It's going to be a complement to manual testing, where you have these are like sanity checks. I want to make sure that big things didn't break. Yeah. And then once I made sure that big things didn't break, I'm going to go in and really test out the kind of nuances here and there that we haven't written tests for, or we probably aren't going to write tests for because there's too much. I think it's foolish to think that you can just have your devs write all your tests. because that's the other thing is, that takes them away from development time.
Yeah.
So that's an issue as well. So
Yeah.
I think one model that works really well is to pair a dev with a tester, and then they kind of bounce off. So the tester, when they need help with writing some of the code, can go to the dev and say, hey, I want to do this thing. Can you help me out? And then the dev can say, okay, I'm going to make this update. I know what the code looks like for the test, so I'm just going to update that real quick. I'm going to let the tester write the majority of the test, but I'm going to help out to make sure that everything's still running when I make changes here and there.
Yeah, and I guess the user acceptance testing sort of comes in and merges in a little bit there, because WebdriverIO would probably be able to say, yes, the person clicked that accordion and there was an animation, this text appeared in that div. What they're probably not testing is that accordion bounced up and down 6 or 7 times, and halfway through it stretched 100% of the screen, and then when it hit the bottom, it went back to the normal size. I guess WebdriverIO wouldn't pick that up, but somebody actually looking at the screen would.
Right. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep, that's a very good point.
So, with this all being JavaScript, is there any integration with my IDE, or any IDEs really, to actually help you work with WebDriver?
Yeah, because it integrates with Mocha, then any sort of, like, I know WebStorm, they have a Mocha integration. You can integrate it with that. Me personally, I just run the test from my command line.
Yep.
And that's just what I'm used to. It's not a better way or anything. It's just, it works, and I just want to keep going with what works.
Yeah, sure.
There are, in Sublime Text, I know that there is a package that will do kind of the keyword expansion. So you can say the common commands in WebdriverIO, you can kind of expand those using tab key and things like that.
Sure.
But yeah, the fact that it's integrated with Mocha makes basically anything that you can do, any integrations with Mocha kind of come along with it.
Okay. And because we sort of skirted around there between the GUI and the CLI battle, I guess we can, because you can run it from the command line, that you can integrate it with your build process.
Yep. I've done a lot of work around like CI/CD, which is continuous integration, continuous development, that process idea, with tools like Travis CI, which will run, like, say you make a code change and you commit it to whatever source code repository you're using, GitHub being a very popular one out there. It'll listen to that and then run these other things. So you can actually have it say, when I commit code and I push it up to GitHub, go ahead and run my WebdriverIO test. And if you do that, you do want to have a third-party tool like Sauce Labs integrated, so that it doesn't have to spin up its own Selenium server. It just uses the Sauce Labs one.
Sure. It's a bit like a webhook type thing.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And I know I mentioned it, but for those that don't know what webhooks are, could you maybe explain what they are?
I can try. Basically,
bit of a curveball for you.
Yeah. I know them just enough to find use out of them. Basically, I think they're ways of getting notified when things change. So you kind of tell, you have 2 different websites. You have the website that you want to do something, and then the website that takes actions. So GitHub is the one that would take the action, and it would say, okay, GitHub, whenever you have an update to your code, just let me know about it, please, because I have some stuff to do. So that's kind of how webhooks work. You tell the website, hey, when something happens to you, just let me know about it, because I want to do stuff when that occurs.
Sure.
Yeah.
Good. So for the listeners and myself, if we want to get into and start using WebdriverIO, where should we start? What should we be looking at?
Yeah, there's an official getting started guide on the WebdriverIO website. That's webdriver.io. That's the actual website. And then there's like a getting started link at the very top that you can go to, and that'll actually walk you through writing your first test using. Let me double check, but I believe it covers. It's a developer guide, is what it's called.
Right.
And it goes through installation. It'll actually have you download Selenium Server, but you can. There are some alternatives to that if you'd like. And then it has a basic test, and it gets you running through there. And then there's a second part to it, which is using the WebdriverIO config tool, which is super awesome. And it'll basically walk you through writing a configuration file about your test. So it's going to ask you where you want to run your test, what test framework you want to use. So that's Mocha, Jasmine, things like that. And then just a whole bunch of information about your tests. So it's all set up for you. And then from there, you just keep going on. So that's the official guide. I've done a couple of videos on YouTube. If you just search for 5 minutes with WebdriverIO, I basically do a screencast of mostly what they did on the Getting Started guide. I've got a couple of other videos out there on various topics on there. And then there's a good collection of boilerplate projects out there that you can just download and run. I'm currently working on a free tool it's called Test Your Login. Testyourlog.in is the actual URL. And the goal with this is you don't write any code. All you do is go to a website, enter some details about the page you want to test. So say you want to test the login page on like twitter.com.
Yep.
And you enter that in, and you enter in the selector for the username input, the selector for the password input, a valid username with a valid password. I promise I don't store any of that information. You should have a test user and password that you're semi comfortable with, leaking out.
Yep.
Just to begin with, that can't do any major damage. And then like an invalid username and things like that. Yep. And what that'll do is when you click the button, it's gonna generate a folder that has all your tests in it. It has what's called a page object in it, and that's kind of an advanced way of formatting your tests and making them more reusable. And it'll zip that all up, and you'll just download it from the website. And then you can just go into that directory and hit npm install, and then run npm test, and it'll run your test for you. Nice. So you don't have to do any of the configuration or anything. It kind of has some standard stuff built out for you. Yeah.
Well, that's cool. That is cool. And you're doing a course as well on this, which we've got a promotion for.
Yep.
So to get 20% off, if you want that promotional code to get that discount, you're gonna have to go and look at the show notes, because I'll put it in there, which is great. So there's a 20% off on that. And while we're talking about prices and that, is there a price for using WebDriver, or a price for actually having a Selenium server?
No, all these tools are free to use as long as you set it up yourself. And that's one of the key things that I really like about this is you don't have to pay. You don't have to commit to paying per month before you even know that it's useful or that you're going to use it.
Yep.
So yeah, you can have it run locally on your own machine for free. That's super easy. But if you do want to use it in your company, you are going to want to pay for a third-party service, because it just makes things a lot easier. Specifically, that third-party Selenium server, Sauce Labs browser stack testing bot. One of those you're going to really want.
Because I guess it become a bit of a beast to manage all those physical servers, all the Linux and all the devices, the mobile devices and things that you've got to run. Get someone else to do that for you. It's going to be cheaper and less of a headache in the long run.
Right. Yeah. You want to spend as little time on this as you can, because you want to do the thing that is the key to the business, which is writing the actual code for it. Yeah, but also Travis CI or CodeShip, those type of CI/CD servers, you're probably going to want to pay for that, so that you have your tests automatically run. Although you could set up a Jenkins server yourself. If your team already has one, you can integrate with it. So say when I build my code, I'm going to go ahead and run my test as well. So yeah, there are some costs that are associated with it if you want to get advanced, but you can try it all out yourself for free without having to make any commitments, enter any email addresses. You don't need to do any of that.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Fantastic. So we're just about out of time for today's show. I'd like to thank you for coming on and explaining WebdriverIO to us, not to get confused with WebDriver.
Mm-hmm.
All the links and that we've spoken about, Mocha, Appium, Selenium, WebDriver, WebdriverIO, they'll all be in the show notes, so don't worry about scribbling those down. And I'd just like to thank Kevin again for spending the time with us today to record this show.
Yeah, it's been wonderful. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, not a problem. Thank you very much again. And thanks to you guys out there and girls out there for listening to Cynical Developer. I'm James Sluddart, and you've been listening to Kevin Lamping talking about WebdriverIO. If you have any questions about this or any other episode, then drop us an email, a tweet, or leave a comment on the website where you can find all the resource links, show notes for each episode. And if you enjoy this episode, please leave a review on your favourite podcast platform, iTunes, Stitcher, whatever it is, and help the Cynical Developer to reach more developers around the globe.